Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Taking Your Next Step podcast from Collegians for Christ. Through each episode, we will journey together focusing on knowing what you believe and why you believe it. If you are eager, like I am, to strengthen your faith and take your next step now by joining us in today's episode. You know, we live in a day where products and things are marketed to us 24/7. There are people who get degrees in marketing, in advertising, and they specialize in ways to get you and I to want things. And I'm not saying anybody who has a degree in marketing or advertising is a bad person or have a wrong degree. There is a need for it. We utilize marketing often with our campus ministries to ensure that students know about Collegians for Christ and can learn about the Bible study and resources and different things that we have. But the ultimate reality is you and I live in a culture that bombards us with advertisements, with social media, commercials, billboards, signs up and down the road that say, hey, what you have is not enough, so you need this. And it's hard for you and I to turn the wanters off. And so we're going to look at a passage here, and it deals with our pursuit of contentment. And I think when we think of contentment, many times we do think of material things. We think of possessions, but I think it runs so much deeper into relationships, into our purpose and mission in life. You and I have to learn to be content in this world. And Paul deals with that here in 1 Timothy. I'm just going to read a few verses. We'll dive straight into our episode here. He says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse number 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. But they, here's the contrast, but they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, while which some have coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And so we see in our passage here, he talks about true contentment, and he talks about some dangers that you and I can fall into. Now, true wealth is found in contentment. When we talk about contentment, we're talking about this. We're satisfied. There's an inner sufficiency that keeps us at peace in spite of what is going on around us. It means to have enough. And can I say this? Contentment is not a feeling. It is more a state of mind, if you will. It is a choice that you and I make each and every day. If we're going to understand what contentment is, we need to learn what it is not. Contentment is not you and I just mess that up big time. So we'll bridge that. So the opposite of contentment is covetousness, which is a sin. Now, earthly wealth does not last. That's what he's talking about here in our passage. Jesus talks about that where our heart is, there our treasure will be, or where our treasure will be, or is, there our heart will be. And so he talks about what you and I are pursuing for contentment. Our heart's going to be drawn that way. But then he also tells us to lay not up, treasures upon earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, but you and I need to lay up treasures in heaven. What's he talking about here? He's talking about you and I being content. Now, earthly wealth does not last. Everything you and I have, we will leave behind. He says we came in with nothing, we're going to leave with nothing. Our pastor has a kind of a funny little saying, and maybe you've heard it, but he's never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul. Meaning you and I came in this world literally nothing, naked. And we're going to leave literally nothing. All the possessions, everything we put together and tried to hoard, we're not going to leave them here. You see, in our culture, it's very easy to get that thing that you wanted, that the commercial said you need, and you're happy for a moment. But then you realize it's not as good as it used to be, or the new ones come out, or it just doesn't bring the happiness and contentment that it once did. That is the ultimate reality of what possessions do. You see, our basic necessities should be enough. Paul talks about this in Philippians 4. He talks about, hey, I have learned how to abound and also how to be abased. I've learned how to live at the top, and I've learned how to live at the bottom. And he says, look, I've learned just to be thankful for what God has given me with clothing and food. You see, we so consistently focus on the luxuries that we have forgotten how to enjoy our necessities. We're blessed people. We're overly blessed people here in America, and there's other countries around the world that people are blessed, but then there's other places that literally the necessities of life are luxuries to them. To have clean water and good food to eat and a comfortable shelter or house to live in, that is a luxury where you and I oftentimes can take that for granted. You and I have to learn to be content. That's what Paul says in Philippians 4. He said, I've learned, whether I'm at the top, whether I'm at the bottom, whether God has blessed me materially, God has blessed me with relationships, or whether God has allowed me not to have financial security, whether God has allowed people to forsake me. We see Paul talk a lot about that. And so contentment runs deep. You and I cannot rely on other people to validate us. We cannot rely on other people to produce our identity. We can't rely on other people and should not rely on other people to make us content. A husband should not rely on his wife and vice versa. And you and I with friends, we can't, and family, we can't put on them that they have to make us content. God is the source of our contentment. It is Him that can help us to be content. He talks in our passage here about the pursuit of riches and about how the love of money is the root of all evil. He said, they that will be rich fall into a snare or a trap. So the question is being rich, is that sin? Is being rich a problem? Because we have met people who are Christians who are rich. We understand rich is really relative. The person who is rich is the one who has more money than you. And so you could have $1,000 in the bank. The person with $5,000 in the bank is going to be rich in your eyes. Now the person with $1 million in the bank, they're going to be rich in your eyes. But if you have the $1 million in the bank, the person with $5 million in the bank is going to be rich. But the person with 100,000 will not be rich. Though the person with 100,000 would be rich to the person with 5,000. If you get what I'm saying, it's just very relative. And so what is rich? The Bible doesn't per se give us an example or say, hey, this is what rich is. We just understand here he's talking about the pursuit of riches. He says there will be rich. This is a desire that comes from our reasoning. This is consideration of saying, look, I just want to be rich. It's saying that's my main goal. That's my main focus. And I'm going to do everything that I can to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with God blessing you, and God's going to bless people differently. We even see that in scripture, with the talents, 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents. So God, does bless people differently. It doesn't mean people that are rich are necessarily sinful or that it's sinful to have riches, but He does give us a caution here. The more you and I have, the more that we will desire. The more you and I have, the harder it can be to find contentment. One writer said this, it's not the possession of riches, but the love of them that leads men into temptation. And he says 2 things happen here. One, they've erred from the faith. They've gone astray. They've strayed away. What about the pursuit or love of riches would cause people to err from the faith? Jesus says, look, you can't serve God and mammon. The problem is if you're going to pursue riches, make that your focus, it's going to put God in second place. And that's where people can get drawn away. And I think we have to caution ourselves. We all can, even as Christians, fall into that trap to get caught up in the lure and the attraction and the flashiness and, hey, I need this and I see them. And I think the one of the dangerous things is comparing ourselves with others. Oh, look what they have. Oh, they have so much more. Oh, they're rich. Oh, look at their house. Look at their car. Look at their clothing. Look at their relationships. Look at their friendships. Look at their mental well-being. I want that. And when we constantly want what someone else has because we're comparing ourselves, we lose contentment. What can help us with contentment is remembering what God has done. What can help us with contentment is knowing who you are in Christ. You see, our contentment should come from Him, not things or people. Contentment is a state of being. It's something that you and I can learn to do regardless of the circumstances. Paul said, I've learned to be content.
No matter if I have had everything taken from me, no matter if all the people have forsaken me, and that's hard. But a people and things cannot be what produces contentment in our life. And as you and I stop, pause in life, and begin to remember what God has done, begin to remember all that He's given us, we'll begin to see the necessities of life as a blessing. As you and I sit down and really begin to thank Him for what He's done, thank Him for what we have, I think as we pause and do that, it will help us tremendously to see all that God's done and to help it to produce contentment in our life. Because the problem is here, without contentment, you and I can err from the faith. Lust and coveting is a sin, and it will lead us away from God. And he also said here at the bottom of the passage, they pierce themselves through with many arrows. What does he mean there? That's kind of very descriptive. They have literally allowed arrows to pierce their body, pierce their heart. He's saying this, what they thought would bring happiness actually brings sorrow. And so what they pursued so much, that relationship, that person, those things, that job, the fulfillment they thought was going to be their purpose in life. They pursued it so much. They thought it would bring happiness. And maybe it did for a moment. Maybe it did for a season. But then ultimately, sometimes it brings sorrow because we place too much expectation on that. One writer said this, riches are a trap. They lead to bondage, not freedom. Instead of giving satisfaction, riches create additional lust and desires, and these must be satisfied. You see, the more you have, the more you want. And that's, yes, materially, but it's also, as we're talking about with people, relationships, jobs. There's so many different things that contentment falls under the umbrella. I worked for a company for about 8 or 9 years. And the boss, he was a Christian man. He was an awesome boss to work for. I mean, they had a great culture there. They took care of their employees. I love working there. And as you are a young man looking up to this man who's in his 50s, close to 60, and you see that, you know, he's prosperous. He has a company, a building supply company, and you see that, he has, different locations, and he has toys and house at the beach. And you would look at the American life and say, wow, he's really successful. And as a young man, I want that. And I remember him sharing with me multiple times that God had blessed him. And he would say this, he said, the problem is with the more I have, he says, I lose so much sleep at night. And he would open up and share that with me. And I remember, I've never forgotten that. He said, because it stresses me. I have to think about this, worry about this, stress about this money, this location, this house, this thing. And he said, while it's all great, he said, really it produces more stress in my life. And I appreciate his transparency with that. I've never forgotten it. So I think as we wrap this episode up, there is a passage in Proverbs that as a young Christian, I began to grow and read and learn. And this became kind of a prayer for my life. And then I've met other people, both men and women, who have said, hey, this passage in Proverbs is really their prayer in life. And it's Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. I'm just going to paraphrase it for you. You can read it on your own time. But it essentially says this. It says, neither give me riches nor give me poverty. Please don't make me rich because I don't want to forsake you, Lord. I don't want to go after other things and leave you behind. But also don't make me poor, Lord, because I don't want to use your name in vain. I don't want to steal. I don't want to sin. I don't want to be a stumbling block to other people who would look less of you. And so the prayer is there, Lord, give me enough in life that I would be content. Not too much, not too little. And that has been the prayer for my life. And if we're going to be content, understand this, it's a learned behavior. If you find yourself not content, it's something you can learn. If you find yourself somewhat content, you can learn to be more content. And I think this episode is just a reminder. I think we all know we need to be content as believers. And sometimes we lose focus. We lose perspective on it. But if we're going to learn to be content, we need to stop. We need to pause in the hurry and the busyness of life. And we need to remember and reflect back on who God is, all that God has done, what you and I are promised in life, and what God has given us in life. And we'll many times see we are blessed beyond measure, and we begin to look at what God has promised to us and what we do have as our necessities. We can begin to be content. And when contentment sets in, guess what? It gives you an inner peace. It gives you an inner joy despite anything that's going on around you, and it produces hope in our life.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please share it with a friend or subscribe to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can connect with Collegians for Christ online for more information and resources at cfccampusministry.com.